Hi, I wanted to thank you for the chance to tell this story. You know, when I watch the news, I get overwhelmed. What am I supposed to do? What can I do about Korea? Immigration? Is the government ever going to start again? And when I begin to feel that way, I binge watch Nessun. I've not been able to figure that out, but it doesn't accomplish anything for anyone. So when I begin to slide that way, when I've got the remote in my hand, I think about stories my dad told me. Now, I'm 66 years old, and if you're my age, you grew up on stories of the Great Depression. My dad would tell us stories. I had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and he would tell us stories about the Great Depression. Some of them were true, some were meaningful, and some were both. His parents had been well-to-do before the economy tanked, and they enjoyed spending money. So that when the you-know-what hit the fan, they had no savings, and they had really no way to feed their 5 sons or clothe them. My grandfather tried to work, started a small business, but whenever he had money, he spent it on other people, bought a few rounds of drinks in a few bars, and spread his affection among other families, which caused difficulty between he and my grandmother, and obviously for my dad. My dad told us that when he was in the 1st grade, he would walk to school. It was about a block, and he'd walk home for lunch. Now, the reason the 6-year-olds in 1929 would walk home is so they could be with their mothers, and the mother would say, "Don't worry, you can take care of it. 2 + 2 is 4. Stop fighting with Jack. Do what the teacher says." And then at 1 o'clock, they could restart the class. And my dad would do that, and sometimes it would work out. But sometimes he'd come home, and his mother would say, "There's no food." And when she said there was no food, she didn't mean there was no food you like. She meant there was no food. And those were bad days. But there were worse. Sometimes he would come home, and there would be no food, and his mother would be rearranging the family's possession because there was no way to pay the rent. And he would go back to school. Now, Dad was hungry, and he never ended up homeless. He ended up living in a couple places, but he was never homeless. He repeated the 1st grade. And if you asked him why he repeated the 1st grade, he would say, "Well, I was in a car accident. I was out of school for about 2 weeks." And I always thought that was hooey. I mean, what 6-year-old, whether in 1929 or in 2019, who doesn't know where they're going to sleep at night, really cares if A, E, I, O, and U, and sometimes Y, are vowels? None. Dad told us about 3 folks who helped him during this time. I don't know their first names. I only know their last names. 2 of them were the Ronins. Now, they lived a block or 2 over. They didn't have any children living with them, and they had a plum tree. And the Ronins said to the Anderson boys, "Hey, you can eat any plums you find on the ground." It was very generous of them. A few days after they said that, they had to revise the rule and say, "You can't shake the tree." But Dad would talk about, at night, if there was a thunderstorm or a windstorm came through when there were plums on the tree, breakfast at the Ronins in the morning. Nothing was better than that. The other person who helped them was Mrs. Shine. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Shine lived next to my grandparents, and Mr. Shine did not like my grandfather. I do not know why. But he said, "The Anderson boys cannot come into my yard under any reason, for any circumstance. Not to retrieve a baseball, not to get a dog, for no reason at all." On the boundary between the Shine and Anderson homes, my grandmother and grandfather had a standalone garage, and it had a window. Now, that window looked out over an apple tree. Mrs. Shine had the same view as Mr. Shine, but she had a different vision. So when fishing nets appeared under the apples and shook them free, she didn't see it. When rakes and shovels were whacking at the limbs to knock the apples tree free and drag them back across the property line, she never saw them. And when Mr. Shine would come home at night and he would say, "Were those Andersons in my yard?" she would say, "No, they were not." Now, Dad died in January 2017, and he was pretty much with it until a day or 2 before he died. If you asked him about the Ronins or the Shines, he would tell you essentially the same story that I told you. he would smile when he said it. Now, maybe the adjectives and the adverbs would be a little different, but he would tell you the same story. He remembered 87 years afterwards. But these people gave him green apples and bruised plums. But what they really gave him was hope. Now, I don't think many of us are called on to be Mother Teresa or Gandhi or Martin Luther King. We're called on to do small things. Thanks.
Something very straight. I'm an aspiring comedian. This is my second time, so be gentle, okay? All right. And I'm also lousy at timing things. I remember 35 years ago, I ran a marathon and thinking I was going to do a 9-minute pace and realizing at 3 miles in that I was doing a 7.5-minute mile pace, and so I'd better slow down. So, Elizabeth, I need you to really wave when I have a minute left, because I have no idea how many cards I can get through. So, and you know what? I'm hoping that you guys let me get to the bar first. After this, I promised myself. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about modern life and just some of my observations. You know, I just think there's so many things we could be talking about. There's such a double standard between the sexes. Is it just me, or has anyone else noticed that? You know, you guys, for the record, I love men. I was married to one. I gave birth to 2. I sleep with Robert Redford every night. He is a 10.2-pound rescue Chihuahua. So let's just get that straight, okay? But you guys have no idea. You're clueless, okay? What we live with, okay? The expense, I love this. I'm out on the dating scene. Surprise, surprise. What we spend on makeup, clothing. You guys can wear the same thing for 20 years. Believe me, I'm out on the dating scene. I've seen it, right? But we're supposed to split the bill. Okay, how many ladies here spend at least $100 a month on their natural hair color? Okay, come on, let's be, come on. I'm calling you out. Okay. The latest is, do you know we not only use foundation right now, there are people in this room who are using a product called primer. Isn't this true, ladies? Okay, you know what the guys are like, what is she talking about? This is a thing. It's a thing. How about eyelash extensions? Anyone checked out those prices? Right? Men will not believe it if you say it's over $100 a month to maintain your eyelash extensions. It's terrifying. But nowhere is the double standard as evident as on dating sites. You will see men, bald, overweight, big smile. When was the last time you saw an overweight woman with thinning hair with that kind of big smile? Or you say, what the heck? Double standard. You guys have no idea. So let's move on to getting older. We are in such denial about aging. Now, let's be honest. Can we be honest? Okay. Babies are aging. There is no one who is alive who is not aging. We're in such denial. I remember my grandmother who lived to 99 years and 10 months. Gosh darn it. Anyway, why do we think it's a success to live to 100, okay? I always say anyone who thinks it's a success to live to 100, hasn't visited with many 90 and 95-year-olds. I mean, it's just a bell-shaped curve. Not all. There's exceptions. Okay. But we're in denial. I remember my grandmother was 92, and she was in the assisted living facility, and she said, "I'm old. It's time for God to take me. I'm old." And you know what my mother said? "There's only a minute left. I'm not in the first." Okay. So, and my mother said, "You're not old." I said, "Mom," and she's flippin' old. All right. So, there's a lot of good things about getting older, but obviously I don't have the time to tell you. But last year, I got an email subject line. This is true story, as they all are. The subject line, some of you got this email also. It said, "Bridal Expo at Waverly Oaks, on March 13th. But you see, I'm not in tune anymore with bridal expos, so I read it, to my eyes, it read as Burial Expo. All right. Okay, so in closing, anyone here ever been divorced? Can I get a holla? Holla! Okay, all right. So, do you remember telling your parents? I remember my mother said, "Why are you getting divorced? He's not an alcoholic and he doesn't hit you." Okay. Now that's a flippin' low bar, ladies. I guess I'm just too picky. See you at the bar.